mother's death without looking it up. Not because we were estranged, though I have often described my relationship with her as fraught and complicated. In the end, though, I was a really good daughter, getting her to all of her doctor's appointments, visiting frequently, all of that. At the time of my mother's death, she was surrounded by 3 of her 4 daughters, including me, and her husband of 60 years. In fact, my hand was on her chest when she drew her last rickety breath. I cannot tell you the date because I didn't have time to sear it into my memory and grieve properly. I didn't have time because there was my dad. Never were 4 girls as cherished and admired as we 4 were by our father, and never was a father more beloved than by the 4 of us. In sharp contrast to my relationship with my mother, my relationship with my father was simple, pure love. Even after, or maybe even especially after he was diagnosed with dementia, we became closer than ever. It was my mother, though, who was his anchor to the world. Without her there, he was untethered, adrift in a confusing and often frightening unknown. He needed to be taken care of. Although I have 3 sisters, none of them lives in this area. We 4 are scattered across the United States. Only I live here, where my parents have lived virtually their entire lives. Over the years, people have come up to me sympathetically, tisking, "Oh, poor you. It's all on you. You have to do everything." Now, those who know me, which I feel is pretty much everybody in this room, know that I'm no Pollyanna. I complain about everything, but about this, I have to set the record straight. Never once did I feel that I had to. I always felt that I got to. I got to be there when then candidate Trump came on the news, and my father looked up and said, "I don't know who that guy is, but I think he's kind of an asshole." Which is a great character. I got to sit and look through family photo albums with him, reminding him who everyone was. "Oh, that's my son Colin, he's in college." And every time he would respond, "What? You have a kid in college? But you're just a kid yourself." "I know, it's crazy." And we would both laugh. I got to play gin with him, a game he had taught me when I really was just a kid. I could track the progression of his disease as we went from playing with 10 cards and knocking to 7 cards to finally just picking up cards and putting them down just to give our hands something to do. One night, we were talking about the town in which he was born, Mercedes, Texas. He had moved from there with his family when he was just 8 years old and had never been back. When I told him I'd always been kind of curious about going there and seeing what it was like, he got very excited. "Let's do it." We started making our plans, wondering if there were any hotels there now, if his old school was still there, if his father's grocery store was still in business. That night I called my sister and told her about it. She said, "Maybe we could rent an RV and all go. I wonder what that would cost," she mused. "You know we can't really do this, right?" I said, I needed help just getting him to the VA for his doctor's appointments. It seemed like every 20 minutes he had to go to the bathroom, urgently. He was always hungry. By the next day, he had forgotten about our conversation, but in the moment, I got to share the excitement and fantasy of our big adventure with him. In the weeks following my mother's death, my father would have panic attacks. Without her there, he was quite literally lost. He didn't know where he was, and he was afraid that if he didn't know, no one else could know either. He was terrified that he would never see anyone that he loved again. When he was in this state, the only thing that would ease his panic was talking to me. The staff was instructed to call me whenever he was in a feeling this way. Every time I would tell him I knew where he was, that he was only a few minutes from me. Would he like me to come over? His relief was palpable. "Oh, yes, please, come as soon as you can. I'll wait right here." And I always did. despite the fact that virtually as soon as he hung up the phone, he would forget about our conversation. I always came, just in case. One day, while I was at work, I got a different kind of call. It was the hospice nurse telling me that my father was transitioning. Of course, I immediately rushed to his side, calling my sisters along the way to tell them that this was that call. That day, I spent the whole afternoon kissing his brow, scratching his head, because he always liked that, like an old dog, and watching as his gnarled, arthritic fingers moved in graceful patterns as if he were conducting some beautiful invisible orchestra. And I sat with all those memories that were just out of his reach. My nearest sister arrived that evening, having driven in from Michigan. We stayed with him together into the night until one of the caregivers assured us that he was stable and we should go home and get some rest. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was the hospice nurse, apologizing for calling so early, immediately reassuring me that he was still stable, but she was about to go off duty and she wanted to let me know that they had given him some oxygen overnight just for comfort care. He was fine, she said, so I drifted off for a while, not wanting to disturb my sister after her long drive the day before. A couple of hours later, we were both up, planning what we should bring for snacks for what we were certain would be a long vigil. We were on our way to the store when my phone rang. We need you to come right away. We did a perilous U-turn and headed over. I don't think my sister had even completely stopped her car before I jumped up and ran to his room. When I got there, one of our favorite nurses and caregivers were there with tears in their eyes. My father had died sometime that morning, alone. No beloved daughter surrounding him. My hand was not on his chest when he drew his last breath. Sometimes they plan it that way on purpose, the death professional told me. You know, he never could have left us if we were there, my sister said. Still, I could not bear the thought that I had not been there for this final act of love. Why didn't I jump out of bed when I got that early morning phone call and rush to his side as I had done so many times before? The one time it really mattered, I stayed in bed. I was bereft and could not forgive myself. His funeral was 2 days later, and I was given a Shiva candle. Shiva, from the Hebrew Sheva, meaning 7. The candle was designed to burn for 7 days to mark the official first stage of mourning. Once the hubbub of the funeral had subsided and everyone had returned to their regular lives, I found an odd comfort in the candle. I was happy to see it in the morning when I got up. I said goodnight to it when I went up to bed. 1 week after the funeral, the candle still burned bright. I started carrying it around the house with me, setting it on the counter as I made dinner, propping it on the coffee table while I watched TV. Several more days passed. The candle continued to burn. 8, 9, 10 days. I started greeting it when I passed. Hi, Dad. I started telling it about my day and the funny things my preschool students had said that day, news about my boys. I called my sister, the psychologist, and told her that I had started talking to Candle Dad. That's what I called him. And did she think I was losing it? This is how you know you're in the right family. My sister asked, does he ever answer? No, I said. Then I think you're okay. This is how you know you married the right person. On the 12th night, with no further explanation, I said to my husband, I have to take this candle up to our room and set it on our bedside table and leave it burning there all night long. And he said, okay. That night, I didn't sleep well. It seemed that every half hour or so, I'd have to open one eye to see if the shadows were still dancing on the ceiling, if my dad was still there. By day 13, I could see absolutely nothing that was keeping this flame burning. No wick, no wax, just a tiny flame on the floor of the glass container. I knew in my heart the end was near. I considered calling into work, but A brief check of acceptable reasons did not reveal candle about to extinguish. I briefly considered taking Candle Dad with me to work, but aside from the wisdom of driving with an open flame, I work in a school. You know, kids with candles, ooh, make a wish! So, in the end, I told him that I'd be home right after school. With as much conviction as I could muster, I told him, I will see you then. That day I rushed home. Candle Dad was still there. The flame was weak and sputtering a little. I ran over and held it in both hands. I'm here. It's okay. I'm all right. I'm here. It's okay. I'm all right. I'm here. It's okay. And the candle flared up and a little wisp of smoke floated out of the top. And I knew then, as surely as I know anything, that this was my father's last act of parenting me. The poet Rumi wrote, and still, after all this time, the sun has never said to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with love like that.